Welcome back, everybody. We are moving through the data layers of our application, and we're almost done with the user manager. But we are building here not just a tutorial app, but I want to make the code actually as enterprise ready as possible. So in this course, I'm really trying to cover all of our edge cases, making sure that we're catching all of our errors, making sure that we don't have any edge cases in our code. And so honestly, for most applications, what we have right now probably works totally fine for most use cases. When I click and I build and run, I can see successfully listen to user. It loads up almost instantly. If I see it right, as soon as the screen loads, we get successfully listen to user. Awesome. And that's really quick, right? In theory, there is a point in time when we initialize the user manager and we set it equal to nil before login succeeds and we actually get the current user. So there is some edge case, right, where there is actually no current user, but there should be a current user. Because we had one in the previous session, but maybe this listener didn't attach yet. Could imagine for some reason the login method gets delayed, right? Now you have a situation where the user manager is not actually configured yet. But thinking at a high level here, we had this user manager in the previous session, so we should have been able to save it locally. And Firebase does have an offline mode, and we can configure Firebase offline mode. But because this is such a sensitive piece of data in my app, saving the current user, I actually want to add custom local persistence that we build ourselves for this user. So anytime that we update this variable current user, I also want to persist this variable locally so that I have a local version that I can synchronously fetch when we actually load up the user manager. So if I look at the auth manager quickly, when we loaded the auth manager, we here called get authenticated user. This synchronously pulled the saved auth user from the previous auth state. And so that's why as soon as we set this up, we didn't have this problem because Firebase SDK has this synchronous get authenticated user. But we don't have this same sort of method in Firestore. So instead, we want to create our own custom method so that in here we can call get saved user. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to set up our own local service. Now, when we build any sort of dependency, whether it's a local database or a remote database, we are in the habit now of adding it behind a service. So we want to abstract it to a protocol so that we can change where we are saving it. So the first question is, where are we going to save our user model? We have our user service set up for Firebase, and we have one set up for Mock. But these methods are not the same methods that we need for saving the data locally. So even though we want a protocol for this service, we don't want to reuse this service because this is really our remote service. This has nothing to do with saving the data locally. So we're going to want to save the data locally in a different location than Firebase, obviously. So if we inject the Firebase user service here, that's not going to really help us when we go and save our user model locally. So what we're going to do is rename the user service. I'm going to right click it and refactor it. And I'm going to call this the remote user service. Now we're going to create another protocol called the local user service. I'll open the bracket. So now we're going to have to create two more, another mock and another production service for saving locally. This way we have no dependency between the local and the remote storage. So I can switch out the remote storage without changing my local, or I could change my local without touching the remote. So the next question is, where do we want to save this user model? So looking at it, if you've used user defaults before, you know that it's for simple data. We can store a string in user defaults or a Boolean, but we can't store this entire data model. So we can't use user defaults. The second local option would be Swift data or core data. And we could store this in Swift data or core data, but that's creating an entire database for one data model. That seems like overkill to me. So the most reasonable place where if we only have one data model or maybe one array of data models rather than a whole database, if I don't need 1,000 entries, if I could just need one entry, it's easier to just save this to the file manager. So I can take anything that is codable convert it to a text file, txt file, and then just save that as a file in the file manager. And that's what we're going to do now. The first thing I'm going to do is go to ChatGPT. Let's say in Swift, write an extension for file manager to save a codable data model as a .txt file. The syntax I want is, and let's go ahead and just say file manager .save document, and I pass in maybe a key for the file name as well as the value, and that will call type T. Maybe we'll make it optional. And ChatGPT should know that type T is supposed to be codable. Let's also do a file manager .get document. I should be able to pass in a key of type string. Let's click enter and see what it does. All right, cool. It looks like it is saving the document and it's got a do catch, but it's not throwing the errors out of this function. Down here, same thing, it's not throwing the errors. Let's say throw the errors out of the functions. See if that works. Just so you guys know, I already have this code set up. I am just doing this to show you guys how you might do it if you didn't have the code from me from the start. I think this looks good enough. I think we can edit it from here. Let's go ahead and copy the code. Let's jump into our project. I'm going to go to the extensions folders. The extensions folder, let's right click, create a new empty file. I'll call this file manager plus ext. Let's paste in what we got so far. Let's edit it real quick because ChatGPT is good, but it is not great and it is not going to replace us. So firstly, I think that we can just delete this because I think the encode method actually accepts an optional. I could be wrong there. We don't need this on 2 lines because we're only going to use it once. So I'll just cut this, paste it here. Get document URL. Let's see what that looks like. All right, good, but let's make it a little cleaner. I'm going to copy this. So we'll go the file manager documents directory. Cool. Looks like we're getting the first index, so we'll just call it .first here. I'll force unwrap it, which is the same as accessing the 0 index. I know there's always a document directory in an iPhone, so that on an iOS device, so that this should never break. And then let's add our pending path component. Just add it here and delete this. All right, get document URL options, atomic. I don't know if we need that. I'm just going to delete this so that we have the default write to method. When in doubt, I'd rather go with whatever the default parameters are. So we save a document with literally 3 lines of code. That is so simple, much easier than creating a core data or Swift data database. Get document, I think we have very similar code here. Let's get the document URL, try to get the data from it. And now after we get the data, we need to decode it back into type T. Let's just put this on 1 line here. And then we should be able to just return this. So let's go and delete this. And I think that will compile. 3 lines of code to save, 3 lines of code to fetch. I love it. So now we should be able to use these methods in our actual data service. So let's go back to the user manager, local user service. Let's create a struct here and call it let's call it file manager user persistence, maybe just to separate out the user service. And we'll make this a local user service. Let's actually call this local user persistent, just to have a different naming convention. In here, let's create a func called get current user. We want to make sure that this is synchronous and returns a user model. So if there is one saved, we should be able to get it synchronously without async await here. So here, let's try, we'll make it optional, file manager dot get document. We need a key. Let's call this the key is the current user maybe. And let's do another function here called save current user. Open the brackets. And this one should throw. And we'll pass in the user of type user model. So here we will also try file manager dot save document. Let's use the same key and we'll paste in the value. Grows. I'm making this one optional because I don't really care. If there is no user, I don't want that to actually throw an error. It'll just return nil. Here, this should always save every time we actually go and save down a user. I don't want to repeat this key twice, so let's just up here and say let user document key equals this. Make it private. Paste this here twice. Let's copy these two functions, put them in our protocol here. While we're at it, let's create another struct and make it the mock user persistence, conform to local user persistence, get current user, and save current user. In here, I will init in the same way that we did our mock user service. I will mock the local persistence. We'll get current user, and then we're just not going to do anything when we save it down for now. Cool. So now when we initialize a user manager down here, we'll pass in the remote service, remote of type remote user service, as well as a local of type local user service or local user persistent. Up here, we'll save both. We'll say this will be the remote, this will be the local. Local is of type local user persistent. Self.remote equals remote, self.local equals local. You know, you could call this local user persistence if you want. Local is just shorter. Maybe it's a bad naming convention, but do what you want. It's your application. The benefit of this now is that we should be able to access the local.getCurrentUser on launch. And this is now a synchronous process. So we should always load up the current user as soon as the app loads. Let's change up our functions down here. So we have everything that was service is now remote. Let's create a function in here, private func save current user locally. And let's just create a task here and do catch. And we will try to local.save current user. And we'll save whatever the current user is. So we'll save whatever this value is every time. Let's just print here, error saving current user locally. We'll print out the error. And again, let's also print here, success saved current user locally. And now let's just call this every time we get an updated value for the current user. We'll just save it here. It should be user. Lastly, just for a second, let's go ahead and print out loaded current user on launch. And we'll print out the current user dot user ID. And this is optional. All right, let's build and get the compiler errors quick that we will clean up quick, then we'll test it, and then we'll wrap up this video. Our compiler is telling us that we need to update the initializer for the user service. So we'll add an environment now, user manager, and we need to now pass in both a remote and a local user persistence. And we can see here that we're gonna have to pass in one, and then we're gonna have to pass in mock user persistence as well. And I'll pass in the mock user. Now, it doesn't really make sense because even though we have two databases running, right? We have a local database and our remote database. And when I make a mock, if I put a current user in one of them, I'm going to want it in both. I'm never going to have like a current user in the remote and not in the local, or vice versa. Like I want these to behave with the same user at all times. So let's create one initializer where we can just initialize both of these from a mock. Jump back into the user manager quick. Let's create another struct, right? So many structs. Let's make this a struct and call this mock user services with an S. And I will add in here both a local and a remote, and we'll initialize them from the user that we add for our mock. So it looks like this should be the init. Paste it in here. If it is our mock, I'll set the remote equal to mock user service, pass in the user, and we'll say self.local equals mock user persistence. We'll pass in the same user. Let's also create a struct for production user services. And then we're going to do the exact same thing, except these will be our actual prod services, which will be the Firebase user service and the file manager user persistent. All right, so now I want to use this or this in my initializer here. So let's just call this services of type. Now we can't use both of these types. So let's create a protocol called user services. And to conform to user services, you must have both of these. So we'll make this conform to the protocol and this conform to the protocol. Pass in user services. This will be the services.remote, services.local. All right, so let's delete these private keywords quick. Well, let's get some keyboard shortcuts going. So Control Shift and down arrow. Now I have two different cursors. You can see the two cursors working around. From here, I will Shift Option right arrow to go to the end of this word. Then I will let go of Option, but still hold Shift and delete this space as well. Without touching anything else, I'm going to go down arrow so that the two cursors remain. Shift Option right, let go of Option, right arrow, delete, arrow down, Shift Option right, let go of Option, right arrow, and delete. There we go. These should be variables, and we'll make them get only, and we should be good to go. Let's fix our previews quick. Environment, we're going to add a user manager with mock user services, and now I can just pass in my mock user. I'll delete this, I'll copy this, paste it here. This one should be nil. Go and delete the existing. See in our profile view, I will paste here as well. Looks like that's already set up. Settings view, let's go ahead and paste. This user is nil. I'll delete this line. Let's see here. This user is mock. I'll delete this line. This user is mock, and I'll delete this line. Let's build and see if it compiles. Might have one or two more. App view, we will paste this in here. And down here, I think we just need to make this mock. And then onboarding completed view. Let's go here with, I guess, no user should work. And build and run. Hopefully this compiles. One more location, our actual app now. So in the actual app, let's go ahead and add into the environment the user manager with our production user services. Notice how this is production, not Firebase, because we're now using both Firebase and file manager. Go ahead and build, and now I think it will compile. If everything works correctly on first launch, when we sync the user on that listener, it should then immediately save to the file manager. So this is from the previous session, that's correct. All right, so I got a printout here, success saved current user locally. That is great. I'm going to move to that code. Let's go user manager. And I'm going to in here, let's also print out the NS home directory. So in this time when I build and run it, the loaded current user on launch should be the actual user because it should have saved into the actual file manager. User on launch, and we have a user ID. Great. So this looks like it's working. I printed out the home directory because now I'm going to open up this file. So I'll copy this home directory, open up the terminal, go to open and paste in that directory. You should see a file pop up. We saved it in the documents, and we should see our current user file here. So now we can see we converted the user model to a TXT file, and this is what it looks like when it's saved. So it's literally just converting it to JSON and then saving it as a text file. And then we are loading it back up. Looks like it's working perfectly. We have one problem in our app though, which is that loaded current user on launch triggered twice. So although our code is working, I'm looking at what is printing out in the logs here, and I've noticed some pretty weird behavior. So before I thought that the auth listener might have just been triggering twice for some, maybe that was just how the listener was supposed to behave. But now I look at the loaded current user on launch printout, and that's printing twice as well. And when I go and I look at our user manager, the initializer for the user manager, I thought was only going to run one time, but it turns out it's clearly running twice. So I did a little quick debugging. I'm trying to figure out what has happened here. Some of you guys probably already know this, but apparently the initialization of observable is not the exact same as when we used to use @state object. I tweeted this problem, and somebody sent me an article, which I will link below for you guys to read. So basically the initialization of state object had this auto closure in it, and the initialization of a generic @state does not have that. And to simplify a complicated issue, the difference basically means that the initializer for an @state might actually trigger multiple times. So what's happening here is this init is actually triggering twice, although only the first one is being used in the application. So I'll link the article. You'll be able to read a little bit about it. But so basically in our code here, we're initializing the auth manager like this in the user manager. This is basically the same thing as doing @state private var, and we'll call it user manager equals this, just so that we can see this maybe a little more clearly. Auth manager equals this. And let's put those in the environment. So even when I run it like this, we still have this bug where it initializes twice. And it's basically that anytime this view gets recreated, the initializer for that @state will rerun, although only the first initialized user manager is going to persist and actually be in this state. If you ask me, I think that's a little bit of like a bug and a unwanted behavior in SwiftUI, but I guess that is how the state property actually works. So with the observable, we have this kind of weird situation. I'll post a Stack Overflow post where somebody asked this exact same question as well. The solution is to basically try to avoid doing anything complex in the initialization of an observable. So later in this course, we're going to create a bunch of view models, and view models are obviously @observable. So we're going to be sure to not run any complex code in the initialization of our view model. And I think that will solve our problem most of the time. In this situation, however, I actually really want this current user to be set up synchronously from our data source. And I really want this init to only run one time. So luckily there's one other solution that we have here. And the solution is that basically this behavior is only happening because of the @state. And so if we were to initialize the user manager outside of the SwiftUI view lifecycle, then we can figure a way to only initialize it once. So what we're going to do here, just to hack around this solution, actually quite simply, because we already have this at the beginning of our application, we know that the did finish launching with options is only going to trigger this function, only triggers on app launch one time. So in here, let's go ahead and create our dependency. So in here, I will just cut this. I'll just cut both of these, paste them in here. And let's go ahead and create a let and a let. So now I know this is only going to trigger once because this function will only ever trigger one time all the time. We can then pass these into our app delegate. So here we'll say we'll create a variable called auth manager, which is of type auth manager. And I will put an exclamation mark here, which is not a force unwrap, but in this instance, this means that we are for sure going to create and set auth manager before we try to fetch and get value for it. So as soon as we create an auth manager, let's go ahead and set self.authManager equal to this. And we'll do another one for user manager, and then we'll set user manager equal to this. And so now from our actual environment, we no longer need this environment builder view. So let's go ahead and cut this, delete it. Just refactor, and as we go here, we'll put our environment here, and we'll go ahead and just call the delegate.userManager, delegate.authManager. Let's build and run it one more time. I think now these will only initialize one time, which is exactly what is expected. And great, it only initialized once. which is exactly what we were hoping for the first time, of course. So just to recap, the @observable, when we use @observable, which is the macro here, the initializer can run multiple times, but the result of the first one is the only one that's actually going to be used. So most of the time that's not a problem, but we really want to avoid any complex logic in the init most of the time. I'm going to keep this in here because now we've solved it by initializing it outside of the SwiftUI view lifecycle. A little confusing. Sorry about that, guys. I think there's a lot of people confused on that, honestly. And honestly, I would hope that Apple changes that behavior in the future, but we'll see. I'm going to quickly just wrap up this video. Let's go back to the user manager and let's just delete these printouts here. And then up here, let's go ahead and move some of our code here to separate files. So let's open up our project navigator and let's just start at the top, I guess. Let's go and create our, just like we did for our auth, where we have models and services. In our user, we're going to have models, and let's create services. But inside the services, let's create two folders, one for local services and one for remote. Let's cut the local user persistence protocol and paste it into our local. Let's also cut the file manager user persistence, paste it into the local. And one more, I will cut the mock user persistence and paste it into the local folder as well. Back to the user manager, let's delete some of these extra lines. Remote user service, let's cut this, jump to the remote, paste it in. Let's go to the mocks and paste that in. Let's go to the Firebase one. And I'll take the import Firebase Firestore as well as Swiffle Firestore. And let's cut that. Paste in here. Fix this. And then last but not least, I think we have the user services, which I will just move all of this into one file. So let's just cut this. Let's go to our services and just paste in a file here. So we have our, in the services folder, we'll have user services, which will be the protocol that contains both the remote and the local. And we'll also have the user manager here, which I will now go and delete these extra lines. And I think that almost wraps up this. It turns out, all right, listener registration is coming from the Firebase SDK. So we are only importing Firebase inside this file now. Let's go ahead and create a type alias called listener registration. And this will now be a type in our code base that is equal to the Firebase Firestore dot listener registration. That should fix our compiler errors in the user manager. Let's click Command R to build and run, make sure that it does compile. Let's go ahead and import SwiftUI into the file manager user persistence. And now let's build and run. And I think that will wrap up this video. All right. Again, just to remind you guys, the auth manager and the user manager are the most complicated and most stressful when building any app because they are the most important. And now we finally have these set up. I think they're set up pretty well. And now we can move forward pretty quickly as we move to the rest of our data sources. Let's go ahead and Option Command C. I'll make this a feature and we'll say local user persistent. Let's stage it, commit it, push it up to GitHub, and I'll see you guys in the next video.